Hey, how are you? This is Daniel Rizendi, and today we're going to have an international look on how Europe will rule the 2030s. And this is the photo of the day. It's me playing with snow outside in Prague. Prague is a beautiful city. It is in Europe, and I thought I'd show it to you. So let's get going. Uh, First, a disclaimer. This is a silly theory based on overthinking and excessively random pattern recognition. So you can't expect anyone to know whether Europe will rule the 2030s. What does that even mean? But there's some data, there's some evidence, there is some pattern recognition that I wanted to share with you guys. So stick with me if you're interested, all right? So first, we need to talk about America in the late 80s and 90s. They had just won the Cold War. There were the Reagan era tax and regulation cuts, deregulation in general. Clinton's government overall was pretty much a very centrist kind of government, and it kind of led to an unprecedented economic expansion. The 1990s was the longest economic expansion in the history of the United States. Until the 2009 to 2020 expansion. So it was a really, really interesting time, to be honest. Obviously, politics was much more mild than it is today. There's a lot of things going on. The 80s, the 90s, whoever grew up then, has a certain nostalgia about it. I think overall, the 90s are remembered as a decade where America was still really good, where it was kind of great. Keep that in mind. Let's move on to the late 90s and the early 2000s. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, the Eurozone was created. It was created on the 1st of January 1999, and then it gradually got adopted, obviously. It started, there was a lot of credit expansion that followed because, well, Greece and Italy and Southern Europe could borrow money more easily. Eastern Europe, obviously, was free from communism, and it started developing really fast. And the US, well, throughout the 2000s, there was 9/11, the stock market flat, and the US got into a lot of wars. So this is more like the decade of Europe, the late 1990s, the early 2000s. The EU was like really high approval ratings. A lot of countries were joining, and it seemed really promising, really. Seemed like a very interesting moment to be European. And if you have a look here, the euro to dollar ratio, it actually peaked in 2008, just before the financial crisis. So living in this period here is obviously very interesting. It's very promising for Europeans overall. So that's a very interesting thing to think about. Then we're going to move to a third period, which is the late 2000s and most of the 2010s. And because of the commodity boom that happened, especially in the 2000s, Australia, Canada, and some really big resource-based countries, they started having some very good economies. Obviously, both the Australian dollar and the Canadian dollar, they both peaked against the US dollar around 2011, 2012. And they were actually stronger than the US dollar. Which isn't usual. Like the Canadian dollar today is by far weaker than the US dollar, and the Australian dollar, it was weak throughout its history mostly. So commodity boom helped, currencies peaked, Australia debt pretty much neared zero. Like it was literally around this time, it was literally zero, and Australia actually had a 28-year GDP growth streak, so that's pretty impressive. So Australia in the 2010s, like in 2010 and 2012, like it was a force to be reckoned with. Canada, Australia, they're really promising countries. New Zealand as well, more so than say Europe or America, who got really, really roughened up by the 2008 crisis and the European debt crisis. So let's move on. After 2015, America started to be back on track a little bit, and that has nothing to do with Trump's election or anything. It's just the stock market got back on track, wage growth got back on track, the dollar index increased, there was a tech boom with a gazillion jobs related to it, and even after the pandemic, if you see the S&P 500, like this is the pandemic, like you can barely notice it. Like by 2021, everything was on all-time highs, and yeah, wage growth was very, very significant. So America did kind of get back into the scene, and we've seen some very solid economic growth that we hadn't seen since the 80s and 90s. Obviously, there's a lot of problems with that. but it's just an analogy here. And so now we think of the future. We're in 2025, 26 now, and we got to think, will Europe come back in the future, just like America came back? So you see, there was this triangulation where it was America for a bit in the 90s, then Europe in the early 2000s, then Canada, Australia, those more commodity and resource-driven economies in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And then it was America again. And what I'm asking is, could it go back to Europe? And there's some reasons why it might. The first reason is there's some very interesting hubs in Europe. Denmark, the Netherlands, Ireland, Switzerland, they're doing very well. Ireland obviously is growing massively. It's attracted a lot of foreign investment. The Dutch and the Danish, they really know how to run their country really efficiently. Switzerland has always been a landmark for prosperity and stuff. So there's a lot of small country hubs in Europe that are doing very well individually. The south of Europe has a lot of net migration of millionaires. So if you see here, 2,200 moved to Italy, 800 millionaires moved to Portugal, a good chunk, 1,200 moved to Greece, and those people bring money, they bring investment, and that flows into all of Europe due to, well, the euro and the shared economy and stuff. Eastern Europe is catching up. Poland keeps growing 3% a year. It's had a very consistent growth. American isolationism and Canada and Australia overspending, having a bit more of a migration problem, obviously. There are countries in Europe that are also overspending, but well, with America keeps going with like high trade barriers and tariffs and tries to isolate itself more. It could be that Europe comes back in focus in a way that we haven't really seen until like 20 years ago, since 20 years ago. Obviously, the big three are a real challenge: Germany, France, and Italy. Italy has extremely high debt. France has extremely high government intervention and regulation. Germany has energy problems, which is pretty clear. Could they overcome it? Yes. And even if they don't entirely overcome it, there's still like really good, promising European countries. Like I said, Poland, Denmark, Switzerland, Ireland, the Netherlands. They're doing really well. And of course, most of the most developed countries by HDI, they're still in Europe. So there are some reasons to have a promising look at Europe. And then you might say, oh, the West is over. This alternation between Australia, Canada, the US, and Europe is long gone. I'm not sure that that's true. Latin America is old before it's rich. Like, there's no countries in Latin America that are even close to being wealthy like Europe, but they already have demographic challenges. East Asia has the worst demographic crisis in the world. Korea, China, Japan, their population is literally going to collapse. Africa is nowhere near developed enough to be a true hub in the next 20 years, probably 30. South Asia is actually an interesting bet, and it's closer than Africa is, but like India is not going to be first world anytime soon. It's developing and it's very promising, but you should give it 20 years. You should give it 30 years. It's going in the right track. It's growing immensely. There's more social cohesion and family unity. Every Indian you meet, they're married, they have kids. So it's promising in that sense, but take a trip to India and then tell me if it's going to be developed in 10 years. And in the Middle East is actually already quite developed. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar. But they have human challenges, and they have, obviously, because they're explicitly religious, explicitly Muslim, they couldn't as easily integrate people into because Europe, that's what the West is really good at. Like, people immigrate there and they integrate into their culture without having to completely sacrifice what they believed in before. And I'm not sure that the Middle East is there or will ever be there, honestly. So it's hard to see a future where either Europe or America or North America or Australia, New Zealand don't lead in desirability and charm, let's say, but we'll see what happens in the next 10 to 20 years. So to wrap up, if the US lags behind, Europe could be in an interesting position to take over its status, well, as the relevant world power like it once was. Latin America doesn't really seem to be catching up anytime soon. Whereas East Asia faces serious demographic challenges. Australia and Canada have problems of their own, and there are two small populations in a global context. The BRICS have consistently underperformed expectations. They're really disappointing. Brazil's corrupt and stagnated. Russia's corrupt, in war, and stagnated. India has good prospects, but is still far from it. And China has a population collapse and it's authoritarian as well. And the Middle East faces challenges with regards to stability, obviously, because there's war there in a lot of places, and with regards to human rights as well. So which region do you think will dominate the world in the future? Let me know in the comments below.